I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to a video conference edition of the New York Times Close Up. The U.S. economy has imploded, plunging faster than it did in the Great Depression, and it may sink even deeper. Well over 25 million Americans applied for unemployment in the last 6 weeks. President Trump pushing for the business community to reopen, and more states are going along. If you want a haircut or a tattoo, go to Georgia. But what would reopening actually look like in big cities like New York or Chicago? Would shoppers flock back to spend money at Macy's, Bloomingdale's, and The Gap? Would Wall Streeters head back to trading desks where they literally sit shoulder to shoulder with colleagues after riding on crowded elevators? Will audiences return to Broadway, and will theater owners be forced to keep the house half empty? Here's what Bill Gates says about reopening the economy, quote, "Picture restaurants that only seat people at every other table, and airplanes where every middle seat is empty. The manufacturing industry will need to change factories to keep workers farther apart." There's plenty to talk about with three top business reporters at the New York Times. David Gelles writes the corner office column, as well as features for the Sunday business section. Sapna Maheshwari covers retail for the Times, and Michael Corkery writes about finance and its impact on businesses and consumers. So the economy this past week shrank by almost 5% in the first quarter. That's the most since 2008. Even Governor Cuomo is talking about reopening businesses upstate in mid-May. But Sapna, you say, and Michael says this past week, that the biggest mall operator in America plans to open dozens of malls this weekend. Sapna, how is that going to work? And will the shoppers actually come out and shop?
Well, this was a fascinating bit of information. So Simon Property Group, which is the biggest mall operator in the country, said that they'll be opening 49 shopping centers. A lot of them are in Texas, Indiana, places like Arkansas, and they have a whole set of plans for how the new shopping mall will look. The bathrooms will have tape over every other sink and every other urinal to encourage social distancing. Security guards will politely be approaching groups of people, telling them to keep proper distance apart. And it sounds like they're asking stores to check employees' temperatures when they arrive at the malls. So it's a big question around whether shoppers will actually show up, and also whether all the retailers within the mall will open this weekend. But they seem to have a blueprint for what this new pandemic era mall might look like.
What do you think about, Michael? Are the shoppers going to show up? Are the employees going to show up? And should we be taking everyone's temperature, literally and figuratively?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we can, while a lot of these discretionary retailers have been closed, the essential retailers like a Walmart or a Target have remained open this whole time. And the plans that Simon laid out for all this social distancing and the polite asking for everybody to keep space between each other, and offering temperature checks. Well, that sounds nice if you've visited a Walmart in the past month. The best laid plans don't always come to fruition. I talked to workers at a lot of these stores that have stayed open that just talk about, even with all the efforts to keep crowds in check. The crowds are still mixing. People are still close together in the aisles. Workers feel scared to come to work. So that's the reality of when people are in stores. They lose track of what they should be doing. And I think again, it's just a real question of whether like something that's laid out by Simon, when it comes into practice, whether it's actually going to work or not.
David Gelles, you write the corner office column in the New York Times. It seems like the corner office in private industry is doing a little bit better than the corner office in government. The relative ease, as you wrote the other day, with which Salesforce acquired so much protective gear is a big contrast in terms of how the government is doing. Why is that?
What we do know is that over the last several months, where the supply chains that I think many people expected the government to have in place, the strategic national stockpile, the ability to quickly ramp up production of personal protective equipment and ventilators, for example, to meet the challenges of a pandemic that we've seen coming since, frankly, the start of January at least, the government, for whatever reason, simply wasn't able to do that. Instead, it has been left to private industry, both companies large and small, to try to step up and fill the vacuum, frankly, left by a government that wasn't up to the task, again, for whatever reason. And it's not my place to sort of lay blame. What we know, though, is that individuals like Mark Benioff, who I wrote about in today's paper, have stepped up, leveraging their business connections and their checkbooks to source millions of units of personal protective gear, ventilators, and more, and bring them from China in a matter of weeks to get them to hospitals. Benioff wasn't the only one doing it. His effort was joined by State Farm, Walmart, Uber, and more. And there have been several parallel efforts by everyone from Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, to Tim Cook, the chief executive of Apple. And in addition to that, of course, we've seen many U.S. Companies, from General Motors to 3M to Brooks Brothers, transition their factory lines from making everything from cars to fancy suits to starting again to make ventilators and masks and more, the stuff people actually need to give frontline workers the protection they need to combat this virus.
The president is asking states and localities to reopen. Are they more willing than private businessmen, or is there a contradiction there, a dichotomy there as well? Michael, David, I'm sorry.
There's no single answer to any of these questions. It's varying at a state to state, a county to county, a city to city, and a company to company level. And so I think at the highest levels, sure, you are seeing the president eager to reopen the economy, understandably. There's so much economic hardship. There's so much suffering. I think we all want things to get back to normal as soon as we possibly can. And yet at the same time, you hear companies and CEOs in particular really reticent, really concerned about moving too quickly. There was a call between CEOs and the president 2 weeks ago. I spoke to some of the CEOs that were on that call, and they described a real give and take, a real push and pull, where the president and his administration was urging people to reopen, and CEOs were pushing right back and saying, yes, we want to reopen too, but we need more testing. That's the number one demand. They need a better sense of whether their employees are carrying this virus in an asymptomatic way and potentially infecting their colleagues. And they need to be sure that consumers have the confidence that they are not ill so that they can come and patronize those stores. And until I think we see much broader testing, it's going to be hard for the largest employers and the CEOs of the nation's most important companies to really get behind a full-throated reopening in a significant way.
Sapna, you talked about the fact that this may signal the death of the department store. Why is that? And if it does signal that, does it also signal maybe a revival of mom and pop stores to some extent, or are all of them going to the benefit of online shopping?
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen with the department stores is they are, despite all the efforts they've made to move to an online world, they are so dependent on these huge physical stores. And I think that was made extremely clear when Macy's on March 30th said that after having closed its stores for nearly 2 weeks, it had lost the majority of its sales, which means its customers weren't going straight to the websites, they weren't going to Bloomingdale's, and they weren't making big orders. And so I think for this sector in particular, which is an anchor store at many malls, they're in difficult shape. I mean, they've been in tough shape for the past few years, and to have this kind of sudden shutdown is a huge shock for them. And so I think that they're extremely vulnerable from the analysts we've been speaking with and from the credit rating agencies that have been downgrading them. And so it's it really remains to be seen what will happen with them, but it's not looking good.
Michael, what about Wall Street? Obviously, there's a lot of close contact in Wall Street in terms of people working closely together. What are the plans there? What do the people you talk to there say about their reopening? How much of their work can be done from a distance? What's going to happen with the market?
Well, I think it's still again, wait and see. I mean, a lot of, and some of our colleagues have written about this. Sure, a lot of trading can all be done remotely, just like journalism. But it has been pointed out that there still is, with all these traders spread out in some cases, or money managers, the information flow isn't as good. It isn't as quick, even with sort of instant communication of online and text and Slack and everything. And there is still some that symmetry that goes with being all together in a trading floor. I think they're itching to get back, but again, despite all of the political pressure that David cites, and understandably so, to get the economy up and running, I think there's great reticence to, especially white collar work, to rush back into these offices if you don't need to. There's also the question of liability, and if companies rush too soon and they don't really have a really vital reason to go back into their offices, and another outbreak occurs, they could that could lead them quite vulnerable to lawsuits. That's something they're looking to actually get protection from. So I think when it comes to white collar work, I think there's great desire, but not a lot of movement and plans yet to come back to the offices.
David, we had a story in the Times the other day about liability. That seems like it's a potentially big issue that would hold up stores and companies from opening. Is Congress or is anyone else likely to let them off the hook?
I'm not aware, and as Michael alluded to, I think there are going to be insurance options that come into play there. But remember the alternative. The alternative is foregoing revenues for an indefinite amount of time. So I think those who have that sort of perfect storm of a workforce that feels like it can come back safely, a locality where the government has allowed that business to operate, and critically customers. And I think that's the big wild card here, more so than anything else, because it all comes back to discretionary spending, which for many people has simply evaporated. But if you can get that perfect storm of employees who feel like they can do their job safely, localities who are going to permit you to operate, and enough customers to keep the lights on, I think those are those first baby steps that we'll start to see that will pave the way for a broader reopening of the economy.
Are we seeing real shortages or threatened with real shortages? You talked about the possibility in the food supply, and also there seem to be shortages of paper products. Why would that be?
One great thing that I pointed out, I think there was a lot of skepticism around the toilet paper hoarding. And I saw a brilliant analysis, which rightly pointed out that for many people, when they go about their normal daily lives, they use the restroom at their place of work for most of the day. That's not happening. Everyone is actually using more toilet paper these days because they're at home and they need to buy their own toilet paper and not use the New York Times Company's toilet paper.
Interesting. Michael?
David's right. I mean, we are learning things about our economy in depth, and how the supply chains work in ways that we never thought we would. Toilet paper is probably, I can't imagine how much coverage has been devoted to toilet paper, both by our newspaper and others. It's pretty interesting, but it's how we live, and it says a lot about the times that we're living in, and how these supply chains have been stressed. Just as David points out, look, there is one area that I've been writing about recently is about the meat industry, and if you look at as we plan to reopen the economy that is not essential or has not been deemed essential, there's this essential economy, that has been operating, and the meat plants where our pork and chicken and beef is processed, those have been running, and it's very problematic. Huge amounts of outbreaks, over 24 closures of the plants. Some of them are coming back online that have been closed because of outbreaks. And even as they reopen, there is still big questions about whether they're going to be able to space out workers enough to keep them safe, to keep the plants from closing again. And as a result of these closures, there are shortages coming. They're starting to appear on some cuts of meat, and there's going to be more. I mean, right now, pork production has been reduced by 25% nationally. I mean, it's serious numbers, and that's only going to get worse, and it's going to start to flow through to the grocery aisle. But again, as the states, as the politicians start to make these plans, they're doing their level best to come up with safe ways. But when you really see how, even after a lot of these measures are put in places, like at a Walmart, like at a meat processing plant, it doesn't always go as well as they hoped it would.
Sapna, what are companies doing in terms of advertising that they're back? How much of the virus is playing a role in what they're saying, and how far can they go to be tasteful and appeal to their audiences?
I think we've all seen a really gentle sell. I know I've been watching more cable TV just based on being at home, and it seems like every car ad now starts with, we're going through a tough time. I've talked to influencers on Instagram who actually say that they have been kind of instructed to post relatable life at home content and then sort of mix in shopping posts at different times and in different ways so that people don't feel too pressured and to kind of accept the realities of the situation. But we know for these non-essential retailers, people who are selling clothes and items like that, they really need to sell stuff. And so the way they're going about advertising it outside of, hey, everything is 75% off is really interesting to watch.
We've heard this week that even Congress is not going back to work. How do we expect consumers to go back to work and to shop, and when they account for 70% of the economy? David, why would anyone, rush out to go to a store at this point, or go fly in a plane, or go to a Broadway theater?
At a certain level, that's who we are and what we do. And I think as Michael alluded to, this whole episode is teaching us so much about ourselves. And I would argue that getting together, that going to shows, that shopping, frankly, at a certain level, is sort of a core part of the American identity. These are the experiences and the goods. We define ourselves by the things we do, the things we buy, how we spend our time and money. And as much as everyone is trying to do the right thing and stay home in many counties, I think plenty of people, myself included, are itching to go out. I'd love to go to a restaurant with friends, and I think as soon as I feel safe, I'll do it. Now, there are other people. Remember, we're very fortunate that we all have jobs that allow us to be on Zoom. That's just not the case for so many people around this country, and it's important that we in the media not forget those people. For people who run barbershops and tattoo parlors, they need those people to feel like they want to go out and get their hair done and get tattoos if that's how they want to spend their time and money, because that is actually the real backbone of the economy. So I think for all of our sakes, we should hope that when it is safe, people do resume their normal spending habits as quickly as possible. Because if that sort of cycle breaks down, if we really get an interruption, a sustained interruption in consumer spending, it's going to be very hard to recover more broadly. And we're already seeing that in China. Keith Bradshaw wrote a really smart piece for us over the last day, where he said, listen, the factories in China are going again, but people aren't spending their money. And if that part of the cycle doesn't resume very quickly, there's going to be all sorts of profound downstream effects.
We've often expected the worst, and one of the things that fascinates me about this crisis is how many people are living at the margins, actually running out of money and fairly quickly. But we've proved to be pretty resilient in the past. What do we think in terms of permanent change? 6 months ago, we never heard of coronavirus. What about 6 months or a year from now? Are things going to be back to normal or a new normal? Michael, what do you think?
I mean, who knows? Especially when the health officials are warning of in November this thing could come roaring back. I think in terms of business and the economy, and permanent versus temporary changes. I mean, retail may be a good example of a place that gets a sector that gets permanently changed. I mean, Supna's great story on the department store woes, which are really serious. I mean, this is they're on life support, and sort of just trying to skate through this really difficult time. I mean, this comes after many years of difficult time, keeping their sales up, battling Amazon, and so a lot of a sector like that was already struggling with changes in consumer behavior. This could accelerate those changes and make them permanent, and this could be the end, like Sapna so nicely detailed in that story. This could be the end of department stores. Beyond that, David, I think said it very nicely. I mean, buying and gathering and going to restaurants, it is really part of what we do. It's what, I mean, the economy needs it to happen. There's all this talk of pent up demand. I mean, I spoke to a worker in a Walmart in Dearborn, Michigan yesterday, and she was saying, look, we're open so people can buy food and buy household staples and cleaning supplies. But when people come in here, they're buying TVs, they're buying video games, they are buying furniture, they're buying lawn supplies, they're buying DVDs, whatever. They're consuming things that quote unquote they don't need. And to her, that's was kind of alarming because it means more people, and it means just if you're a worker, again, to David's point, that doesn't have the luxury of staying home, you have to be out there dealing with people. But it also says something about people do like to consume and buy. It brings happiness, it brings fulfillment. It's just part of life, and I think that will continue once this subsides.
Samta, are there any winners that are likely to come out of this among the retail market, particularly in New York City? How are the stores here going to be affected, and is there anything they can do to position themselves to come out of this a little bit better?
It's hard to think of winners because really, for a lot of the retailers I've been talking to, it's a matter of survival. I mean, from the beginning, this has been described as Darwinian. But I think we are in this interesting phase right now where we're seeing kind of an in-between closing completely and opening completely. So we're seeing a lot of retailers actually bring in small numbers of staff into their stores to ship products from stores. Because let's say you're Urban Outfitters, you don't want to open in 6 months with all of your spring inventory still sitting there. So there's some ship from store happening. I think Best Buy is a great example of a retailer that has implemented curbside pickup really quickly, which has been helpful for people who are suddenly working from home and maybe need wires or monitors. And I think the companies that have been quick to do that, that's been interesting to see. There's been talk of, before opening completely, a phase of appointment shopping where you maybe get a slot at a store like a Patagonia or something like that, or a Lululemon, and perhaps walk through that way. I don't know when people will feel comfortable in fitting rooms again. I think in terms of winners, the companies that are poised to succeed, I mean, Lululemon is an example of a company that has said we're not opening till June 1st and we will keep paying people until then. And I think part of the fact is they sell a high-end product to a lot of white-collar workers who are simply dressing in more casual clothes as they work from home. And similarly, I think companies maybe who are selling some of this work from home equipment might be in better shape. But and again, if you have already built a better e-commerce business, that's going to help you very much in the next year.
Okay, we'll have to see how that plays out, and we'll invite you back for an update. David Gelles, Sapna Maheshwari, Michael Corkery of the New York Times, thank you for joining us. I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times and CUNY TV. Thanks for joining us on the New York Times Close Up.